والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Here the word min is used, which leaves them no choice but to count the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam among one of these four at least. Either they would be belonging to the lowest rung, that is Salihin, or to the highest, that is Nabiyyin, but they have to belong to one of the four categories. And none of the four categories is denied them. They are not barred from achieving the very highest of Allah's favors if they truly and honestly follow Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now there is another picture which also is created alongside automatically, and that is, the greater the model be, the more difficult it would be to follow him to perfection. So the chances would be less to rise that degree, to rise to that degree, because the model is set very high and far too lofty for ordinary reach. So there is definitely a possibility that people who would be able to rise to that distinctive mark that is reached by Hazrat Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whereby he is declared a prophet, it would be very rare. Or we can say it's very, very difficult indeed. But to reach the lower marks is comparatively easier. Because in this case, in the case of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the status of prophethood has been lifted beyond the status of prophethood known to us in the earlier times. Yet it is not forbidden. Yet it is not barred. So the race is open. And that is also the greatest compliment to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If the game does not permit you to go beyond certain person, then his winning doesn't carry any sense. I mean, doesn't give any compliment to him. The compliment is given and is enhanced when the race remains open. Yet, despite this open challenge, it is declared that nobody can beat such and such person. So this verse, as translated by Ahmadis, also opens up these possibilities. That is to say, the road to prophethood is open, no doubt. But the standard laid down by the Holy Prophet of Islam of prophethood is so lofty and so high and difficult, placed so much beyond reach of the ordinary people, that this phenomenon, this incident of reaching that status would be obviously very occasional, to say the least. But in another way, it can also become numerous. And what is that way? I must point to that as well. If we Ahmadis translate it like this, like I have translated, then the meaning would be that although the prophethood, the status is open, provided you obey Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with complete obedience, yet because to obey him so completely is very difficult. It is not as easy as to obey Moses, for instance. It is not as easy to obey Jesus, for instance, or Ismail, or Abraham, or anybody else. In status, they were closer to you. So to reach them and to follow them was not difficult. But here in case of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the very nature of his prophethood has become so enlarged and widened that it's awe-inspiring. For instance, prior to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know of no prophet who had brought a universal message, who addressed the whole mankind, except for Adam, But then the man coin was just a small little thing. But after that, we know of no prophet who went beyond his tribal limits or limits of his country. But for the first time we observe Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam declaring himself not to be a prophet of the peoples of Arab, but to the entire mankind. Jamia, what's the first? That is a declaration which we hear for the first time. So the standard of prophethood now has become a prophethood which has a universal character about it. Then he has become a prophet for all times. And previously to him, we know of no prophet who was a prophet for all times. They are limited both in time and space. And Hazur Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam has become unlimited both in space and in time. That is what I mean, the difficulty in way of achieving that standard. So that may happen very rarely. But then how can it be demonstrated that among the followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are so many of his spiritual sons who will at least attain the status of earlier prophets? If that can be established, then this verse, Man yuti'illah wa rasulah, assumes very large proportions. And this has been established by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself by pointing out that although there will be many among my ummah who will not be declared prophets, they will not be given the name of the prophet, but whose status would be the status of earlier prophets of Israel. This he tells us in a tradition where he says, Ashabu ulama ummati ka'anbiya bani Israil. The learned, the scholarly of my ummah are like the prophets of Israel. Now, Israeli prophets enjoyed the status of prophethood because the prophethood was at that time defined as both limited in time and in space. So if they were pious enough to rise to that status, they would also be declared prophets and they would be commissioned as prophets for a limited period to a limited people. But after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if his followers performed the same task, even greater, yet they were not universal. If they rose to the same holiness as earlier prophets rose, still they would not be declared prophets, technically speaking, by the new definition of prophet. So all they could get would be the status of earlier prophets and not the station of earlier prophets. So this is what has been mentioned in this tradition of Rasulullah. Ka'anbiya bin Israel. They would be like the prophets of Israel, but will not be called prophets. So judging from this, I believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given at least 124,000 prophets as his subordinates. And such was the quality of his followers of excellence in spiritual terms, that had they been born earlier, prior to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would have been declared prophets by God at that time. This is the greatest compliments to that ummah, and that compliment is derived from this verse. وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَالصِّدِّيقِينَ. Now in this sense. So this is a verse which raises the status of Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is the peoples of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the highest degree. All that occurred before him in the spiritual world was repeated in totality and more intensely by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A new world was created and a new world was repeated. And the standards of that world were taken beyond the state where previously they had been taken to.